Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kat and I make videos about books, writing and other random things living rent-free in my neurodivergent brain. And today it's already time to talk about my TBR for the month of November. And obviously it's going to be heavily focused on the Neurovember event. I have 7 books on my TBR this month, of which one is quite a thick one, and I also have 1 documentary, and I'm gonna be attempting to black out the Neurovember bingo board with only 6 books. The first book that I want to read in November is Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, and I'm gonna be reading this as an audiobook. This is a memoir from Fern Brady, who is a Scottish comedian. And the blurb says that Fern Brady was told she couldn't be autistic because she'd had loads of boyfriends and is good at eye contact. This is a story of how being female can get in the way of being autistic, and how being autistic can get in the way of being the right kind of woman. I'm quite excited to be reading this month. It's been on my list of books that I want to get to for a little while, and also it's checking a lot of prompts for Neurovember, of which memoir, fun read. I think it touches on topics of mental health as well. It's a neurodivergent author, and also it counts for a neurodivergent main character. It's gonna be a bit of a challenge for me because of her Scottish accent. I'm not a native English speaker, obviously, and some accents are more challenging for me, the Scottish one being one of them. So hopefully I still manage to really understand what she's saying in the book, but I think it's going to be also like a good exercise for me. So I will need to be paying a bit more attention than I usually do for audiobooks, but I think it's fairly short as well. So I think it's a medium level challenge. And then it also counts for sensitivity, because the idea was to stimulate your senses, and I'm going to be listening to this as an audiobook, as I mentioned. And then it also matches the other location, because again, she's Scottish. I'm not sure exactly where mainly the book is set, but I guess to a degree in Scotland, and I think she's mainly touring in the UK. So again, it's a different country than mine, so that counts. The second book on my list is an ebook that I found through the Stuff Your Kindle fantasy event, which I heard about thanks to my friend Rochelle at Good Morning Dreamer. And so I found this book, which is called Lady of Dragons by Shelby Elizabeth. I got the first part. There is a second one, which if I really enjoyed it, then I will get the second book. It is a fantasy romance with a fierce heroine, gentle love interest, sassy dragon companion, and more than a dash of adventure awaits. So we're basically following Finlay, who wants to be a dragon knight, but she also apparently has something going on with her childhood best friend, who is working at the Dragon Sanctuary. And one day, I think she tries to save the life of a dragon and things go horribly wrong, and she ends up tying herself to that dragon. Apparently there's secrets to be uncovered as well, so it sounds pretty exciting. And in terms of prompts for Neurovember, it also checks quite a few boxes. So it was listed on the Stuff Your Kindle website as BIPOC representation, disability representation, LGBTQ representation, and obviously neurodivergence representation as well. And in terms of genre, it's mixing fantasy, romance, and YA. So yeah, quite a good mix for me to be reading this book in November and checking a lot of the prompts. Next, I'm planning to read The Bees by Laline Paull, and I'll be reading this as an audiobook, so that also counts for the sensitivity prompt, which is already crossed over, but there is a lot of overlap between all those books in terms of the November prompts. It's a dystopian fantasy, apparently, and set in a beehive, which, please sign me up. It sounds so intriguing and so interesting. From the little bit of research that I've done, apparently the behavior of the bees, who are the characters in this book, is well documented. Obviously, there are some artistic licenses that are taken so that it's actually a novel and there are stakes and a plot moving forward. But again, from what I've read about this book, it's quite accurate in terms of the life of the beehive and the behavior of bees. So it's going to be a perfect fit for the other species prompt. And it also counts for fantasy again. My next pick is a French book, and it's also a reread for me. It's Comme un oiseau dans un bocal by Lou Lubie. And it's a graphic novel about high intellectual potential or giftedness, depending on which term you want to use. And the core premise of this book is that we talk about giftedness or high intellectual potential mainly about children, but what happens to those gifted children when they grow up. And so this book is following two main characters who have two different profiles of giftedness and kind of seeing what their life has been and what their trajectory has been, how they are accepting their neurodivergence, and they develop a lovely friendship as well. So I really loved this book the first time I read it, and I'm excited to be rereading it for Neurovember. In terms of prompts, it's matching the neurodivergent main character, neurodivergent rep. So for this prompt, the idea was to look beyond autism and ADHD because those are the two that are most talked about and most represented. So I wanted to raise awareness and also learn about other forms of neurodivergence. So this is matching this prompt. And then again, it's matching sensitivity, stimulate your senses, because it's a graphic novel. I also want to read Empire of Normality by Robert Chapman. This is my main nonfiction book for the challenge. So in this book, Robert Chapman is looking at the histories of the neurodiversity and disability movements, and basically arguing that this idea or this myth of a normal brain is actually coming from capitalism. So it's kind of the intersection of neurodivergence or neurodiversity and capitalism, which sounds super interesting. Robert Chapman is neurodivergent himself. He is a philosopher, and looking at this book, I learned that he is an assistant professor in critical neurodiversity studies, which just sounds so interesting. So I'm about to go on a rabbit hole looking at what this field of study entails. Are there courses available? What are the books and all of that? It sounds so cool, and I'm so excited to have discovered that this exists at all. So yeah, very excited to be diving into this. In terms of prompt, as I mentioned, it's going to be my main nonfiction book, and it works for the neuro in the title prompt as well, because the subtitle is Neurodiversity and Capitalism. It's a short read under the 250 pages mark, and it's also going to be my pick for critical thinking. And my final pick for Neurovember is How to ADHD by Jessica McCabe. She is the host of the How to ADHD YouTube channel, which I really enjoy. I don't think I have ADHD, but I still get a lot from this channel in terms of techniques or tools to kind of manage daily life and things that I might be struggling with as a neurodivergent person. So I highly recommend it, and I'm really excited to be diving into her book. In terms of what it's about, I think the title and especially the subtitle is super self-explanatory. The subtitle is An Insider's Guide to Working with Your Brain, Not Against It. So Jessica is obviously neurodivergent herself. She has ADHD. I think she was diagnosed when she was 12 years old and has struggled with it quite a bit. And when she turned 32, she was divorced, living at her mother's place and kind of struggling. She decided to get a better understanding of ADHD and find solutions for the struggle she was having. So she started talking with experts, reading articles, and that led her to documenting her journey on her YouTube channel and now putting out this book where she's basically sharing her firsthand experience and giving all the tools that she's developed to cope with the challenges of ADHD. So I think it's going to be super practical, super pragmatic, and very useful, even for me who I don't think, again, has ADHD, but might benefit from the strategy. So again, another book that I'm very excited about. I also mentioned that I had one documentary on my list for Neurovember, and so this is Life Overtakes Me. It's available on Netflix. I will put the name of the director here because I don't have it, my bad. The topic of this documentary is the hundreds of refugee children in Sweden who are experiencing, as a result of the trauma that they lived, a illness that manifests in almost like a coma form, which is called resignation syndrome. I had never heard of this, and it sounds very intriguing, quite alarming as well. So I think it might be a bit hard-hitting and a bit of a difficult documentary to watch. I think it's only 40 minutes, so that should be manageable as well. But I'm quite curious to learn more about this topic that I knew nothing about, even though I lived in Sweden for several years. In terms of the prompts that this is matching for Neurovember, we have other media, because this is a documentary, not a book. In translation, I'm cheating a little bit. This was the prompt where I struggled the most with, because I do read a lot in English, and most of the books original language is English, and the one that I'm reading in French doesn't have a translation in English either, and I don't think any of those books were translated into French. So anyway, I chose this documentary for this prompt. I think probably the main chunk of it is in English from what I've seen in the trailer, but because they are interviewing and joining the life of those refugee families, some of them don't speak English, so there is subtitles, which counts for translation. It also covers the topic of mental health. It also counts for other location, because it is about another country than my own native country and where I'm currently based. And that's everything I'm looking at for Neurovember. I wanted to give a couple of shout outs to other books that I've read or I'm still currently reading, and then mention some books that I really would like to get to, but it felt like probably a lot for the month of November. So they're still on my radar, but I'm not gonna be prioritizing. If I'm able to get to them in November, that would be amazing, but that's not the priority. So in terms of shout outs, I wanted to mention The Mirror Visitor. I reread this in October, so I will include my thoughts in my October wrap up, but I was really surprised to realize that the main characters in this book are very likely neurodivergent. And I found this book listed in some diversity list, and yeah, people commenting that Thorn at least likely has autism. I think Ophelia, the other main character, is also likely coded as neurodivergent. So it was so interesting to realize that on the second read, because the first time I read this book, neurodivergence wasn't really on my radar, and so that kind of went over my head, which I'm a bit not ashamed, but like, I'm not feeling great about it now. But I'm so happy that I reread it, and that really increased my appreciation of this book. So if you want to pick it up for Neurovember, I can only recommend it. I really, really love this book. The next book that I want to give a shout out to is Remarkably Bright Creatures, which I'm still currently reading in audiobook. I highly recommend the audiobook version. The two narrators are doing an amazing job. I will put their name below. Really, really appreciate it. In this novel, you are following different perspectives from different characters, but one of them is a giant Pacific octopus. I think that's the name. He's called Marcellus. He's an octopus. He's very sassy, and the narrator has this like very fancy pronunciation and accent. It's delightful, and I think it's really fun to get into the head of this octopus and learn little facts about octopi. Is that the plural of octopuses? Anyway, I highly recommend it for the other species prompt of Neurovember. And next, just a very quick shout outs to a few books that I would really like to get to, hopefully in November if I'm very, very productive in terms of reading, otherwise later on. The first one is The Cure for Burnout, which seems to be a very practical book with like strategies and tools again on how to cope with burnout and how to get out of it, which sounds like something that could be very useful for me. The next one is Unmasking Autism, and I've seen this book recommended by so many people. It seems to be kind of the reference book about autism, like the one that gives an appropriate representation of people with autism. And yeah, I'm very curious to pick it up as well, because again, it seems to be like very accurate and like a very good resource for learning. So I wanted to give a shout out to this book as well. And then finally, a book that I was very excited to read but couldn't fit in my month is Sorrow and Bliss. From what I've heard, this is the story of a main character who is struggling with her mental health, and in the span of this book, she goes to do some tests and get a diagnosis for a neurodivergence, but I don't think it's ever named which kind of diagnosis she's getting. And I think it's quite interesting also having this point of view and this experience from the character of just like going through the process of getting a diagnosis. So it's a book that I'm very intrigued about and would really want to read at some point. So those were all my books for Neurovember. I have one more on my TBR, which is not as directly linked to Neurovember, but it's the thick one. It's The Final Empire, the first of the Mistborn series by Sanderson. I've been having this on my TBR for quite a few months, I think, since July, and it got pushed because again, it's quite a chunky one. But I'm gonna be buddy reading this with Rochelle this month, so hopefully I get the accountability that I need to get through it. But I'm also very excited because I've heard many good things about this book. I've never read a Sanderson's book yet, which I really want to correct. My husband has read this and really enjoyed it as well, so I want to be able to discuss it with him. And yeah, it sounds very interesting. It's an epic fantasy set in a world where basically the bad guys won. And so what happens next? It has a heist, it has a very cool magic system built around metals, and it's from a neurodivergent author as well. So I think it could still count for Neurovember, even though it's not really about the topics of Neurovember. So that's why I'm not really counting it for it. But yeah, very excited to be diving in. So there you go. Those were all the books on my TBR for November. I really hope that you will join me for Neurovember. Let me know in the comments below which books you intend to read. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.